It's working now, is it?
Yes. Welcome to Casual Politics. Mr. Darling, thank you very much for accepting my request, and I'm very grateful to you. You've been Member of Parliament since 1987. You've been Chief Secretary to the Treasury when under Tony Blair, Secretary of State for Social Security, Secretary of State for Transport, and then everyone will remember you as the Chancellor of Exchequer, the one who steered this country out of the financial crisis. So my first question is, how did you get involved into politics?
Oh, like most people, because I wanted to change things, and I joined the Labour Party in the 1970s when James Callaghan was the Prime Minister. I became a local councillor in the early 1980s, and I became an MP by accident because at that time Robin Cook was my MP. When the boundaries changed in Edinburgh, he moved to the next constituency, and people said at the next election, well, do you want to stand? And I said I would. I thought it was a no-hope seat because the Tories were triumphant at that time, and I unexpectedly won. Here I am 27 years later.
And you work with two prime ministers. So which one of them you had less trouble to work with?
Well, I think all prime ministers are always trouble to work with. Any good prime minister should be trouble for his or her fellow ministers. They're very different men. They had different strengths, I was lucky. In 13 years, I had 5 or 6 different cabinet positions. And I enjoyed all of them, and I was unusual in that I got to stay in most of my jobs for far longer than ministers do. 4 years in transport, 4 years in social security, then became work and pensions, and as you said, 3 very interesting years in the Treasury, and probably the worst financial crisis we've ever had.
You said financial crisis. When was the reaction of other people in the government first that you announced that a financial crisis was going to hit this country?
Well, I think it went through phases. When in the summer of 2007 I became the Chancellor, everybody thought, isn't this great? We'd had 10 years of growth. And then I remember being on holiday abroad and buying a copy of the Financial Times at the beginning of August 2007 and seeing that a French bank and 1 or 2 German banks were in trouble because they had simply, they couldn't value their funds anymore. They got into trouble in the American subprime housing market, and at that time people thought, well, there's nothing. But it's like the old thing about a cloud no bigger than a man's hand. Northern Rock was the first visible sign that something was far wrong, and then 12 months later, we had a situation where right across the world, banks were collapsing. In America, they got into trouble in this country. But I remember in August 2008, I did an interview with a newspaper, and I said that I thought that this crisis was going to be more deeper and longer lasting than most people thought. Now, at the time, that was highly controversial, though it turned out to have been something of an understatement now.
And at that time, when you announced that financial crisis was going to hit this country, you were criticized by Gordon Brown because he thought that you were frightening the markets.
It's always difficult, as a government minister and particularly as Chancellor, people listen to every word you say and the way you say it. And how do you balance saying, look, things are going to be difficult, without saying, and it's all going to be terrible? Now, I'd said the same thing a month earlier in another interview with the Times newspaper, and there'd been very little reaction to it. But it appeared in the Guardian, and the presentation, the timing of it was just such that suddenly people just leapt onto it. Now, these things happen. It's one of these things. Sometimes you say something and nobody notices. Other times you say things and the world goes on fire. But it was difficult at the time. But I think if you look back now, I think most people would realise that this was a very deep crisis, and it has lasted longer than people thought.
And you said that you knew it since August 2007, so why it took you a while to announce it in the House of Commons?
No. In 2007 was the first sign that things were going wrong.
Yes.
But I think there were very few people in 2007 who foresaw what would happen even 12 months later. I mean, there are one or two now, but they didn't actually remember to tell us at the time. But you know, what was clear to me is that people expected the banking sector to recover in the spring of 2008, and it didn't. And it was obvious as the weeks went on, the months went on, that things were getting worse. So you know, it wasn't a question. You don't go to the House of Commons and say, "Oh, there's a crisis." You know, but as a Chancellor or Minister, you're interviewed regularly on what you think, and you know, you have to use your judgment as to how you put your arguments. Now, actually, in May, I'd said that I thought things were going to be difficult. In July, I said I thought this was quite a big crisis, and nobody noticed those things. But come August, when I did this interview in The Guardian, probably because it was August and things tend to be quieter, people did notice a lot more. Now, the major banking collapse, the Lehman collapse, happened after that, and that's when I think the world sat up and said, hold on, this is bad. And then, of course, at the beginning of October, we had to save our banks from collapsing. If they'd gone down, if RBS, the biggest bank in the world, then had collapsed, it would have brought down the entire banking system with it. So it's not like in August 2007 there was a blinding flash of light that told us all these things were going to happen. You know, they just gradually built on each other. But if you look at the deep-seated underlying problems, with hindsight, you can see it was all building up, though I don't think anyone could have foreseen just how they would come together as they did in the autumn of 2008.
And a while ago you revealed that number 10 unleashed forces of hell when you first issued a stern warning of a likely severity of the recession.
Well, what I said was that you know, the forces of hell, to use that phrase, came from every direction. And I remember that the Conservatives, who were then in opposition, condemned me for having said what I said, and then went on to say, yes, it is bad. So they tried to have it, like all oppositions do, have it both ways. And of course, some of my colleagues thought that, that it wasn't as profound as I had thought. I just thought that you have a duty as a politician to say to people, look, if you're going to enter choppy waters or turbulent waters, you should say, you've got to tell people that you could prepare for this. Equally, you shouldn't, you're not in the business of frightening everybody. But it's a question of just balancing that up. Now, I challenge anyone to get the balance right every single time, because you simply can't. A lot of it depends on what else is going on. But as I say, what are we now, 6 years further on? I don't think anyone would dispute that it was and still is a very difficult situation. And
when you think back to 2008, do you think that the government was right to give a massive bailout to the banks?
Well, yes. If the banks had collapsed, if you just think about it, if RBS on the morning of the 8th of October had no money in it, and the doors had shut, the cash machines went off, people would have rushed to the next bank, and they would have had the same problem, and the next bank, and so on, and it wouldn't have stopped in the UK. The American banks were teetering on the edge as well, as people could then see. So were the European banks. It would have brought the entire banking system down. Now, actually, if the government does things properly, a lot of the money that it put into the banks it will get back. It'll take time, but they will get it back. But most of the money we guaranteed that morning, in the shape of guarantees, were never called because we managed to head off the crisis. And a lot of the money we put into the banking system has been repaid, and at a cost. So actually, the state hasn't lost money on the banks themselves. The real problem we've had is, of course, the economic crisis that inevitably follows a banking crisis. That is where the costs have come in. That's why our borrowing is so much at the moment. That's why the country's debt is so much in the moment. But then most other countries are in the same position. Japan has debt far, far higher than ours because it's had now 25 years of stagnation. And the big challenge to us here in February of 2015 is how do we avoid the same thing happening in Europe?
And during a financial crisis, the role of the Prime Minister is to back his Chancellor, as we saw with Black Wednesday, that John Major backed his Chancellor Norman Lamont. So why it wasn't the same case with Gordon Brown? Why he wanted to push you to resign?
No, I think in terms of the banking crisis, the banking rescue, both of us were absolutely convinced that we would do whatever it took to stop a collapse. And as I said on countless occasions, that Gordon's action in getting other prime ministers and presidents round the table to do the same thing was absolutely critical in avoiding a complete meltdown. So that we were completely at one. Of course, we had differences later on how you dealt not so much with actually the crisis, but how you built, how you prepared for the recovery. But these things happen in politics.
And what have learned the Labour and the Conservative Party since that financial crisis?
What have they learned?
Yes.
Well, I hope that everybody has learned that if you have a banking system that is completely globalized as it is now, that you are very vulnerable to huge flows of funds from one side of the world to the other, and that they can suddenly dry up. If you look at the underlying causes of this crisis, you had lots of savings accumulating in China and Asian economies being invested in America. A lot of it went into the housing market and created this great bubble, which then collapsed. And the other thing that you learn is that if you look at the banking system in the olden days, banks could fail in America, and it would be very sad for that state or that city, but didn't go any further. Now, if you look at something like the subprime crisis in Florida, within weeks it infected the entire banking system.
And now that the United Kingdom has become the fastest growing economy in Europe, do you think that George Osborne was right with his austerity plans in the first place?
No, our economy was growing when we left office in 2010. We know that it was growing. It then stopped, partly because when the Conservatives and the Liberals formed the government, they trashed our record. They said we were like Greece and the rest of it. And remember, they said they were going to remove the deficit by 2015, this year. And yet, in the last autumn statement, just before Christmas, George Osborne stood up and said, "We have halved the deficit in a parliament." Well, that's what I was going to do. And he said that was irresponsible. It wouldn't work. So I think austerity can ruin an economy, but it doesn't always do that. But it has held up our recovery. Now, if you look at the recovery today, is it well established? Well, I'm not sure anyone can say that yet. Part of it is a bounce back, because in any deep recession the economy will bounce back because people are going to spend money. Partly it's the fact that despite what the government says, it did actually allow public spending to carry on for longer than they intended, which of course carries momentum in the economy. So they're not on the same plan as they set out with. But I think if you look ahead, I hope that we've got a recovery. But the biggest single cloud on the horizon, and mind you, it's a bit more than the horizon now, in front of us, is what's going on in the Eurozone, which, if we're not careful, is going to end up like Japan.
So, don't you think that George Osborne, to some extent, he was right? Because in this country, we haven't got anti-austerity movements like Syriza in Greece.
Greece and the UK are worlds apart. The UK is a large, developed economy, and just be a little bit careful, because there's a lot of evidence that people in this country are sick and tired of austerity, if you like, and you'll find out in the election and in a few weeks' time what happens. Greece is completely different, because what is happening to Greece is the Eurozone has imposed draconian cuts, and they have nearly half the population's out of work. They stopped paying a lot of the public spending. Their debt is going up, not down. And of course, the Greek economy, relative to, say, our economy, the German economy, is relatively underdeveloped. So I think the political situation in Greece is entirely different to Northern and Western Europe, if you like. I don't think austerity is not working in Greece. It's patently not, because everything's going the wrong way. Equally, of course, there are other problems in Greece which we don't have. I mean, they have huge problems in public administration, collecting taxes, for example, where for a lot of people, it appears to be a voluntary activity. So, yes, I think austerity in Greece isn't going to work. It does need to be renegotiated in a way that it hasn't been done for 5 years. But also, Greece has got to make some changes as well.
And do you take side with Germans who say no writing off of the debts or Syriza?
Well, I think that's a very rigid position to take. I want to say the plan, the original plan, was the debt was going to come down. Well, actually, debt is now higher. It is so high now, there is no realistic prospect of Greece repaying it. Now, if you look back through history, lots of countries, there comes a time when you have to say, okay, we're going to have to write this off. It happened to Germany, actually. So, I think there needs to be some, flexibility. But equally, if you look at it from the Greek point of view, you can't have a situation where they say, yes, we're going to reform, but we never actually do it. But this comes back as a central problem in the Eurozone. For any single currency union to work, you've got a monetary union, but you need a fiscal union, which means transferring money from the better off bits to the poorer bits. But you also need the mechanisms to make sure they all reform together, which brings you to a political union. Now we don't have that in Europe, and I think the fractures in the Eurozone are worrying. If this isn't sorted, ultimately you could see, I don't think it'll happen, but you could see Greece leaving. And then that's in the edge of what is probably the most unstable part of the world. Now you don't want to see that.
And Christine Lagarde, president of IMF, President Obama, they all praised George Osborne's long economy plan. Why Labour? They say that they're all wrong except Labour on this issue.
No, it's having been in government, the IMF always praises certain governments. I wouldn't read too much into that. If we'd still been in office by now, our deficit would have halved, which despite what the Tories have done, that's the best they can claim. But I thought that was realistic, and actually, as I say, our economy was growing, and there's no reason why it couldn't continue to grow. So I think that I think despite everything that the present government says, all they have managed to do is what we said we would do. Now, I suppose the big question for the UK economy is, looking forward, is how do you try and make sure this recovery, is well founded, and I think we've still got some way to go yet.
And do you think that your party is anti-business and toxic for business, as the chairman of Boots said it?
No, I don't. I think that the Labour Party has long been enthusiastic about backing successful businesses. If you don't have successful businesses, you don't get employment. You don't get the wealth the country needs. And if you look indeed at all the things that we did in the 13 years that we were in government, I think at the time people used to attack us for being too pro-business. Now, if you look at what the chief executive of Boots said, the one policy that he was complaining about was the risk that we might leave Europe. Well, actually, it's the Conservatives who are the flag carriers for leaving Europe, not us. So I don't know what else he said. Maybe he did say, other things too. But I think the businesses have every right, and I'm happy they should engage in public political discussion. Of course, you won't always agree with them. And I've just been through a Scottish referendum campaign when I couldn't get businesses to speak out, even though I wanted them to speak out. And now they're coming along like buses, But it doesn't mean that you get a free ride if you like. If you say something that people don't like, then of course you have to enter into that debate. But I think I have, the idea that somehow we are not in favour of on supporting businesses, is absolute nonsense. All governments from time to time will do things businesses don't like. Businesses will from time to time do things that people don't like. I mean, look at the electricity and gas companies at the moment, and the controversy over the pricing, and guess what? They're now having to cut their prices. So you will get those things, but in any healthy democracy, nobody should be afraid about speaking out.
But why then they're sceptical of a prospect of a Labour government? Because they say that you're anti-business.
Well, I don't accept that, and I've been around in politics long enough that you will always get someone to say something. I mean, this chap from Boots has said that he was misquoted and things were taken out of context. Now, I've no idea what he said. And I say the one thing that he did say that he didn't like was a policy that belongs to the Conservative Party, not us. So there you are. That's life.
And now let's go to the Scottish referendum. You led the Better Together campaign, but you were very critical of the engagement of the Labour Party.
No, it wasn't. The Better Together campaign was backed by Labour, by the Liberals, by the Conservatives, and it did, people who didn't want separation. And we deliberately set the thing up as being cross-party, and we also wanted to attract people who had no particular affiliation at all. And that's the only way I think you can find a referendum, if we ever have one in relation to Europe. My guess is the pro and the antis will be cross-party.
And recently, Nicola Sturgeon, Scotland's First Minister, laid out new proposals for more powers to be devoted to the Scottish referendum. And some people say that it may put at risk the Barnett formula.
No, remember, she's a nationalist and she wants to get Scotland out of the United Kingdom, and nothing short of complete separation will do. I mean, that's what she believes in. She's entitled to that view. I think it's profoundly mistaken, but that's what she believes in. Obviously, if you leave the UK, the Barnett formula goes, and then you're totally exposed to the ups and downs of, say, North Sea oil, for example, which, remember, in the referendum campaign a year ago, the Nationalists assured us that the price wouldn't drop below $113 a barrel, and said it was scaremongering to suggest that it would. Well, look at it today. So it's not surprising that she, as a nationalist, takes that view. I, as a vehemently, anti-nationalist and pro us being part of the United Kingdom, I take a different view. I think it is more devolution. That's perfectly sensible. We just need to make sure it's properly organised so we don't end up creating the very problems that we're trying to solve.
And why do you against that Scottish Parliament take control of income tax?
I'm not. I think if you look at something like income tax, the tax I pay as someone living in Scotland goes to provide me with health and education and roads. It also goes to providing me with defence, and pensions and social security. And I think it's important that because that pooling and sharing within the countries is a very, very important part of what the United Kingdom is. I think what I was concerned about is if you have a situation where, as the Conservatives are proposing, I as a Scottish MP had no say over what the income tax rate is, then you destroy the tax and spend, the fiscal union that underpins our monetary union, and you end up with all the problems that we see in the Eurozone. So that's my complaint, not that the Scottish Parliament shouldn't have more power.
And the leader of the House, William Hague, set out new proposals for English MPs to vote on English laws. Do you think, are they fair in your opinion?
No, I think it's a dog's breakfast, frankly. I don't have any problem in saying if something's completely devolved like health or education, well, each country can decide what they're going to do. But a thing like tax, if you end up in a situation where a UK government couldn't decide on the rate of tax because it was vetoed by one party in one part of the country, then you'd end up like America, where you can't decide anything. Interest rates would go up. Excuse me, sorry, I'm dry up.
And Michael Ashroff's polls, they show that SNP at the next general election will wipe out the Labour Party in Scotland. So are you worried?
Look, opinion polls are just that. They're a snapshot of opinion. I think that if we put forward a coherent and credible case, especially because people are voting for a UK government, then there's no reason why we can't do well and hold on to seats. But any political party going to election needs to be on its mettle. There's an argument to be had. I think in some ways, because Scotland has been in the middle of an equivalent of a general election campaign since 2012. Poll after poll and so on. No, I think we can win, and we can win well. But it needs a lot of hard work. It needs a lot of knocking on doors, phone calls, and the rest of it.
And what should the Labour Party learn from the 1997 election in order to win the next general election?
We won in 1997 because we had the confidence to set out why we thought that the direction the country was going in was wrong, how it could be better. It was all about giving people more opportunity, making sure that people could aspire to get on, to do better for themselves and their families. It was a vision and a hope that people wanted. And they were fed up with the Tory government. They wanted change, and that's what we offered.
But your policies are very popular with the electorate, but you can't sell them. Is it because of your leader? No,
I think what has happened, and it has happened in Scotland, and it's happened in the rest of the UK, and you see it's happening around Europe actually, is there is a degree of disaffection with the political parties that have dominated politics in this country for 100 years. There's an openness to arguments which both the nationalists and UKIP put in England, saying it's all the fault of somebody else, and if only we weren't in Europe or weren't in the UK, it would all be better and we wouldn't have to worry about anything. A degree of cynicism, if you like, that is, well, I haven't seen it in my lifetime before. When you look at the opinion polls just now and how public opinion is spread, right across, maybe 4 or 5 different directions. The fact you're talking about having TV debates with 10 people in front of the cameras, that tells you something's changed a wee bit. But you know, it is the job. You know, if you believe in change, if you believe that the country can be a better place, then you've got to stick up for what you believe in. And you know, you will get people coming along. I mean, you know, to promising things with the nationalists north of the border or UKIP south of the border. But you have to deal with those arguments. That's, you know, that's what politics is about.
Last year you announced that you will stand down as a member of parliament after 28 years in parliament, and you're obviously not the only one. There are some prominent Labour figures such as Jack Straw, Dame Tessa Jaw, David Blunkett, that they're stepping down as well. So do you think that now is the right time, because people are at very mistrust towards politicians and they're not disengaged with politics as they used to be before?
I think it's up to each individual to decide whether or not they feel that they want to carry on being a member of Parliament. Now, you know, I've been in Parliament, as you say, for nearly 28 years. Jack Straw, you mentioned, been in for far longer. But there comes a time...
Since 1979.
Yeah, that's right. And you know, there comes a time when you say, well, look, I've done as much as I think I can do. You know, I'm still young enough to do something else. I would like to do something else, but I don't want to be here when I'm not able to do things. And you know, I've been fortunate in my political life. There's hardly been a day when I haven't wanted to go to work. Now, very few people can say that, but I don't want to be here and say, actually, I don't want to do this anymore. So it's time to go. You know, a banking crisis and a referendum, that's enough for most people, I think. And
what changes have you seen in Parliament since 1987? Major changes?
I think the biggest single change is the one that we talked about a moment ago, in that in the 1980s it was pretty settled, you know, that life was split between the Conservatives and Labour, you know, and that's, we sort of turn about. I think the other thing that's happened, which I think is bad, is that the degree of cynicism, you know, has grown. There's nothing wrong with being sceptical or questioning, far from it. But you know, the cynicism can be very corrosive. That has grown an awful lot, and you know, I think that's part. It's not the only reason, but you know, it's partly contributed to, you know, such a fragmentation of political views. There's other things, of course. You know, it's hard to believe it, but in 1987, the internet hadn't been invented. You know, the mobile phones were a novelty. People's way of communicating now and the exchange of information is just,
right,
you know,
social media.
A different planet, yeah, to the one that 27 years ago.
And my last question is that when you leave Parliament at the next general election, will you say get involved in politics, and whoever is the next Prime Minister, if he offers you to become a peer in the House of Lords, and would you agree to accept it?
Look, my view is, I've done my time. You know, I want to do something different. How can you ever, if you've been, in my case, a member of the Labour Party since 1977, that you know, you spent so much of your life in Parliament, how can you ever not maintain your interest in politics? I mean, it's just impossible. The only difference is on the night of, you know, the 7th of May, I won't be at the Count in Edinburgh. I'll be watching it on the television. And that'll be very different and possibly very difficult, because it's a novelty of not being there on the floor and all the rest of it. But you know, I'm ready for a change.
Absolutely right. We're all ready for a change. Thank you very much, Alistair Darling, for your time.
Thank you. Is that right?